Welcome to today's Treasury Career Corner podcast with the lovely Brendan Boucher, who is the Group Treasurer Compass Group. We're about to go into the original episode that we recorded back in August 2020 during the pandemic. And they were just about to turn a corner as a business, but food services business, so really hit hard by COVID-19. But then they came back. You'll hear that at the end of the episode. We pick up the story from there in another 40 minutes or so. So enjoy today's episode. Let's get on with it. This week's show, I'm joined by Brendan Boucher, Group Treasurer at Compass Group. Compass Group, a world-leading food and support services company, FTSE 100 listed company. Well, I was going to give you annual revenues, but I'm not going to do that. I'd rather talk a bit more about Brendan. He's been the Group Treasurer of the company since January 2018. But prior to this, and we'll explore in the show because we've got some really interesting moves there. Group Treasurer at AstraZeneca, Petrofac based in Dubai, OMV over in Vienna. So it's really encompassed the international moves and things like that. But also chartered accountant, fellow of the ACT. And that's where we are out to, really, with Brendan. I want to go back to the dim, distant days and how you got there. So, Brendan, take us back to the beginning of your career and how you first got started in finance and then discovered the wonderful world of Treasury, sir. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I mean, lots of luck along the way, but just in brief, I studied geology at university, so clearly not a relevant degree, but I joined Coopers and Lybrand, showing my age now, which you'll now know as PwC. So I did my training down in Bristol for 5 years. And really what sort of kick-started it all on for me from there. So I did a secondment to the office in Moscow back in 1995. And it was a real eye-opener, having worked it down in sort of a regional office in Bristol for 5 years. 4 months in Moscow, one summer, really opened my eyes up to, life outside of Bristol and what I'd been used to. So I looked for a move at that point into industry, and luckily I ended up in Glaxo Wellcome in West London, a big pharma company back in the day, and started working as a head office financial accountant, doing consolidations and tax returns, VAT returns, reporting to group and all of this good stuff. Good role, great company. And I lucked into Treasury, I think is the best way to describe it. And it just came about because my predecessor in the Treasury role, we'd done some work together on implementing a car scheme in the UK business. Wow. He moved on internally and was looking for somebody to replace him. And he gave me a call. I'd had some interaction with Treasury, and I went and had lunch with him. He described the role and what the team do in more detail. And I said, it sounds brilliant. It sounds absolutely great. I'm super interested. Went and had an interview, and I didn't get the job. And, from being enthusiastic about it, I was really disappointed about it. But, such is luck sometimes. The guy they offered the job to didn't take it. He went elsewhere, and I got the job. That was my move into Treasury. It was my move from a business unit into head office of Glaxo Wellcome. And that's how I started. My first job in Treasury was as regional Treasury manager for Middle East and Eastern Europe. So basically not doing a front office role or a back office role, but just doing an international advisory role. So I was very lucky to get that opportunity, and that was my start in Treasury.
And you grew there, sort of your experience, and actually it's funny, we were just talking before the show that Brendan used to work with Sarah Jane, who was our first ever guest, Sarah Jane Hall from GlaxoSmithKline, and we were just going through about what she was like and everything else. Fabulous lady. But you then started your development, and to just talk us through your GSK time, because that was, amazing that early in your career. And you get GSK, what were they at the time? Were they FTSE 10 even then?
Yeah. Definitely. So Glaxo Wellcome merged with SmithKline Beecham to form GSK. I came from the legacy GW side. Sarah Jane, who was the group treasurer post-merger, and the other assistant treasurers. My title in GSK was Assistant Treasurer International, which was a great role. So it was an expansion of my Middle East and Eastern Europe portfolio to cover the international region. So that was, in GSK terms at the time, everything other than Europe and the Americas. So some interesting geographies in that portfolio. And, frankly, it was almost like changing companies completely, wow. different office, different colleagues, different boss, different environment. It was an amazing I spent 10 years in total with GSK and predecessors, an amazing company to work for, highly successful, totally international, very blue chip, and very professional. So it was a great environment in which to sort of learn and to evolve from looking after a small portfolio of countries to a large portfolio, and over time picking up experience and increasing sort of responsibility for other things in treasury, whether that was line management of the back office, which I did in GSK, or obviously the funding and risk management aspects.
And as you say, it was it was opportune that you moved companies but didn't. You stayed same company, but again, it sounds like you got real progression there.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think this is a key for me in terms of my own experience, and we'll talk about how people need to sort of develop their careers, but getting as much different experience in different places with different people, particularly. One, it's been very interesting, and two, it's really helped drive my career forward, and that was a pivotal part of it.
And so it drove you forward, then talk us through your time, because then you made the international move after that, but there was development at GSK. What was that like up to 2006 and stuff?
Yeah, I think that, the development was great. You reach a decision point. I was assistant treasurer. Sarah Jane was no intention of moving on. Sarah Jane's still the group treasurer, so probably a good move that I did make a move rather than sort of hanging around, potentially move up internally. But no, joking aside, I had a decision to make to prolong my GSK career, which meant doing something a bit different, or to pursue my treasury career, which really meant an external move. And I deliberated on it a lot and decided actually the things that I enjoy about treasury were still the things I was enjoying about treasury. Therefore, I decided I'd turn down an internal move into the business, and that really was a springboard to make an external move. So I started looking, and again, I was lucky. I would say a good background in GSK and a lot of hard work and experience along the way helped. But I had a call regarding a job, and I remember talking to the recruiter, went through the spec in detail, and I said, it all sounds great. And he said, but there's a catch. And I said, okay, what's the catch? And he said, well, it's an Austrian company. And I said, okay, I understand. I don't speak German. I get the catch. He said, no, that's not the issue at all. It's an international company, but you'd need to move to Vienna. And I said, that's even better. Without really thinking it through, I thought that's fantastic. So I was very lucky. I was able to make the move from assistant treasurer to group treasurer via an external move, and to put into the mix changing sectors. So I moved from pharma to oil and gas, and changing countries from London and the UK to Vienna, Austria.
And what was it you say, you were open to that move? Had you considered international moves before? Was that sort of completely out of the blue something? Again, because we talked earlier on and we were just saying that treasury in your back pocket is fantastic. Sort of your mini passport, if you like, to travelling the world. But, had you thought that yourself, or where were you in that thought process?
To be honest, I was looking for a group treasurer role, an interesting group treasurer role. I think having worked in GSK, very international group, that was a strength given the experience that I'd had and something I'd already enjoyed. And it's not just about the occasional travel to some interesting places, but just the daily contact and interaction with colleagues from all parts of the globe. I really, really enjoyed that. So the international aspect was a bonus. It wasn't something I was absolutely looking for at the time. The more I thought about it, I thought this is a great opportunity. But a leap of faith. I think there are a lot of people that would say, yeah, I'd like to work internationally, but to do it as part of a change of company and a change of industry and a change of job level, in this case from AT to group treasurer, takes a little bit of courage. And it was a step into the unknown. And sort of looking back on it, that whole experience was probably the most challenging of my career and probably the most rewarding in my career in sort of equal measures. And it certainly requires a strong stomach to take that on.
You had the stomach for it. So you were there for, 3 years or so? And what was that like? And when you got into Treasury there, was it a fresh team or brand new, or the established team, or what was the sort of background?
It's a very established team, very stable team, and a lot of experience. And it's probably the first time in my career, which may be what you'd expect when you make the step up to managing people with more, certainly in terms of years experience, more experience than yourself. So I had 3 teams, 3 direct reports, all with significantly more years under their belt and more experience than myself, which is, it's helpful from a learning perspective, introduces some challenges at the same time. So yeah, it's very, very stable team, very successful organization, but a big transition to make.
Yeah. So you made the move. You'd got yourself established in Vienna, properly, feet under the desk and everything else. And then you made another international move. Talk us about that.
Yeah, well, as with these things, it was challenging. And that period I was at OMV coincided with the financial crisis. Mm-hmm. So it was pretty stressful going for a period where liquidity in the market dried up completely and free cash flow dried up completely, with the oil price going from 150 to 50 odd all at the same time. So it was a real sort of challenging, and it was a stressful period. And my wife and I decided, look, we've had a great experience, loved living there, amazing work experience. That's the stage of our careers. Let's head back to the UK. That was the plan, and I had one of those sort of perfect storm situations as I put out feelers, and I actually had 3 simultaneous job offers. Believe it or not, and
Mr. Popular.
Yeah, well, it was just one of those sort of strange situations, and one that felt very familiar and comfortable, which had its attractions. One was a little bit smaller but different, which had its attractions, and one was Petrofac, which again was something completely different as a startup. There was no treasury function at all, and I mulled it over for some time. I remember sitting on a boat on my 40th birthday in Lake Como, speaking to 2 of the companies who are both pressuring me for a decision. So it's funny how you reflect back on these things. But with I talked to a few people, got some external perspective to help, and once I'd really thought about it, the right thing to do was the sort of more challenging one, which again was Petrofac. I turned the job down initially because they said you need to go in to base yourself in the Middle East. And I said, look, part of the reason for my move is to come back to the UK. And the CFO called me one Sunday and said, look, why don't you give it a go? Why don't you go for a year, 18 months? If you like us, we like you, move yourself back to the UK.
And the safety net, as it were.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a British company, but the biggest part of the business run out of the Middle East. So hence a preference to have people on the ground there, albeit with corporate roles. And, it was the right decision to make. So we moved directly from Vienna to Dubai. So it couldn't be more of a contrast in terms of locations. And from a very established role and company to a rapidly growing one and a treasury startup. I was simultaneously group treasurer and group treasury T-boy at the same time. So it's fine. It was a very interesting challenge, very interesting place to be. And, frankly, having had one international move and experience under my belt, making the second one was a lot easier. Just emotionally, it was a lot easier. Being prepared and accepting of things being different and the unknown was just a lot easier.
And you went in and established this treasury, as you say, from scratch. What was that like for someone listening today, thinking, I might do that, or have I got the guts to do it? What are the sort of elements of that you think people need to think about, or, not temper in their minds, but what are the key things? You sound like you're very open to this idea, although it's a brand new challenge. Boom. You've done Vienna. Now you're in the Middle East. What are the things that you would, if someone else was doing a similar move and they're saying, Brendan, what should I do? Or what do I need to think about? What would you say?
Well, I think just you have to be prepared to be out of your comfort zone. That's the number one.
Yeah.
And you going to work in Vienna and you going to work in Dubai at the time were going to be different, but I couldn't articulate how they were going to be different.
Yeah.
And you just have to be open-minded, and there's going to be some setbacks. My boss, when I moved to OMV, was a very experienced CFO. And he said, you're going to go home some days and say, what the hell have I done? Why did I come here? And my last day when I left the office, I was sat with him. I said, I remember you telling me that. And there's plenty of days where I've gone home saying, how are we going to deal with this situation? This is stressful. But there isn't one single day I've gone home and said, I regret making the move to come here. So I think that's kind of the attitude you have to have. You're going to have some setbacks. It's going to test your resilience. And you test your sort of your family and your support network, because this may sound like a small point, but moving, if you've grown up in an area, you've got a network of family and friends around, you're suddenly overseas, your only network in my case was my wife. So you become all things to each other. And that can be good, it can be bad, it can certainly sort of test you out, but it brings you as a sort of family close together, because you're more reliant on one another to help through the sort of the ups and downs. And I think that's what it is. You have to expect that the ups will be a bit higher and the downs might be a bit lower.
Challenging.
Yeah.
In terms of Treasury, diving into that, you said it was a startup in those terms. So what did you focus on? What was your 90-day plan, as it were, or if you remember back that far? But just in general, when you walked into that sort of environment, because just want to do this briefly before we then make that other move to AstraZeneca. But again, if someone's listening in and they're wanting tips, say, oh, actually, I'm going into a fresh treasury, as it were. What's your ethos, if you like, around going into that?
The organisation has to be clear on what the mandate is. In this case, there's a clear mandate for change and clear support from Group CFO, who's my boss, downwards for change. So you have to have that in place to help it be successful. You also, I think, have to be realistic, because if you are making changes, in that case there was an element of taking what had historically been totally decentralized and responsibility for things like bank facilities, bank lines, and all of that with the operating units, and centralizing it. You're going to find some resistance to change from within the business. So again, it's not to say, look, that you're heading into a major conflict and a fight, but it is a case of setting out a sensible plan and to be patient. And the way I approached it was to set out a plan and to identify what absolutely should be the responsibility of the new group treasury function, where the policy boundaries lied, and get all that agreed at the high level in the room with the business units represented. Let's have the debate. Are we all agreed on this? And then we can move forward. And recognize you're not going to be able to do everything all at the same time, and then there may be resistance from parts of the business, and of course we experienced some of that as we went through, but just to sort of work it through. And you have to develop credibility. So if people say, right, you take it on, that's fine, but you better do a better job than we've been able to do ourselves, and better job in some cases means cheaper price for the business. So if you take it on and you don't deliver, then you're going to find more resistance. So again, you have to have the stomach for it, and sometimes to be firm and clear, manage expectations, and be patient. You might say, I want to wave my magic wand and have full centralization in a year. It isn't going to happen. But just start off with the basics, chip away at it, get the credibility, and then you move on to the next stage of building the team, building the infrastructure to support what you need to get done.
And move in the right direction all the time as well.
Yes.
Yeah, as you say. So you were there, 5 years or so?
Yes.
So you did 5 years, Middle East. Why the move?
The key point, so we'd been outside of the UK for 8 years then. We wanted to come back for family reasons, to be closer to our parents as they get a bit older. So I could have relocated with my existing job, just moved, having sort of established the function and the Treasury Group in Dubai. I could have relocated myself back to London and done the job from there. But just the fact that you say, okay, I'm going through the process of having to make another family move, physical move, let's at least have a discussion externally with what other things might be available. And it coincided with a call regarding AstraZeneca, and obviously having worked in pharma before, I knew what I was going into. And again, also another great company, FTSE 5 corporate, and again, some real changes to make as a result of a relocation of the team, in that case from London up to Cheshire. So in the end, I enjoyed my Petrofac time very much, and I enjoyed the people I worked with, good sort of prospects, but it was it became a relatively straightforward decision to say, look, I have to make this move. It's a good opportunity, good time to join. And going back into big pharma, which I'd spent 10 years and enjoyed in the past, was quite attractive as well. So that's how it came about. So we moved then directly from Dubai to Cheshire.
Again, for the people listening, AstraZeneca, it's a massive pharmaceutical that is walked in, brand new team, or where was up to in its development stages?
Yeah, a lot of change in the team. The treasury function had historically been based in central London, was relocated at the time I joined to Cheshire, where the group tax and group finance functions had been for some time. So a mixture, a number of people were asked to and did relocate from London to Cheshire, and a number of people didn't make the move and recruited locally in the northwest. So, clearly a period of lots of changes of personnel in the team. And again, another sort of physical move. So, it's really the focus was not so much a radical overhaul of Treasury, which was obviously in good shape, systems, processes, ways of working. Embedding down a new group of people was prerequisite there following the move.
And how did you do that? We talked earlier about you establishing and some of the stuff, the more practical things about a new Treasury, but what's your people management ethos? Is it about just sitting down and getting to know everyone and being the cuddliest, friendliest Treasury you can be? Or how do you actually do it?
I think it's a bit of all things. Well, one I think with all of this, the whole sort of leadership angle, you have to be true to yourself. Absolutely, it's the wrong approach, in my opinion, to try and be who you aren't. You need to be sort of cognizant of your natural style, may need to be flexed from time to time. And, I'd see myself as generally a fairly relaxed and sort of collegiate person, but certain situations call for a more direct approach. That won't go into sort of specifics, but there were some sort of specifics and things. This is irritating. I don't want to see this way of working. I don't want to see this happening in the team. And, people down had some robust discussions. Said that this has to stop. I remember an off-site that we did in Chester over the course of a weekend where we set out the expectations. I was clear what I expected of the team. We all went through our sort of individual strengths and weaknesses, so we understood each other better. Not just sort of a team bonding session, but a mixture of that sort of soft skills, if you like, and dedicating the time to appreciating that everybody's different in the team. It was very helpful, and then. We used it to have effectively a sort of a contract amongst ourselves, which was helpful. And we, was used more than once subsequently to that, to calling out behaviours which were not commensurate with what we'd agreed. So you have to be prepared to be robust. If you need to make changes, you need to make those changes. But sometimes you've got to work with what you've got, right? So you might say, I want to change the entire team, but I don't think that's the right approach. I think working with what you've got, developing people, giving opportunities, and over time, opportunities will naturally present themselves to change things around or give different people different exposures. And frankly, you need to obviously be cognizant of other people's development as well, and make sure people are getting those opportunities, because if you don't, they will leave. They will get them elsewhere.
You were there for that period of time, and then AstraZeneca moved, but you also then accompanied that with the move to join Compass, and we'll sort of bring ourselves up to date there. And I think with Compass in particular, you can perhaps describe it yourself, but, in the recent times with COVID and everything else, you made a move, which you can describe if you would, and then with the sort of effect on, let's talk about perhaps pre-COVID and what you guys were doing, and then during and then coping. I think it's a lovely little sort of section of the show, as it were, because I think people will certainly really resonate with it as well, because they'll probably be in very similar situations. So, you were there for, again, AstraZeneca for sort of 3 years, and they moved and things, and, talk us through that if you would.
I don't mind saying a little bit sort of frustrating for all of us to have people relocated from London to Cheshire. I moved internationally to Cheshire to lead the team. And then within sort of 3 years, we were asked to relocate again to Cambridge. That's quite a tough ask for people, quite frankly. And, I'm not just talking about the Treasury function. In other areas, the uptake of people wanting to make the second move was relatively low. And again, it's frustrating. It's a brilliant company, great opportunity, and we all enjoyed working there, but personal logistics sometimes dictate what people would want to do professionally. And that's what we were up against. And I felt a little bit bad by not making the move myself and choosing to leave. But it's one of those things, isn't it? Where do you want to locate yourselves? And Cambridge might work for some people. It doesn't work for everybody. But that was difficult. It was difficult to sort of maintain our performance as a function during another period of uncertainty, people making life-changing decisions about whether to relocate or to move. And then as I was exiting, trying to recruit and help build the team, including my sort of successor in AstraZeneca in Cambridge. So, a tricky balance getting all of that right and keeping positive throughout. But, my personal preference led me to make a change. I didn't know much about Compass beforehand, but global catering company. We don't trade as Compass Group, but so you might not be familiar with the name, people listening in, but you almost certainly have eaten our food either in your office, or if you've been to Wimbledon or Twickenham or Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and many other sort of international locations. So global catering company, it was described to me as, look, this is not a caretaker role. We need to make some important changes to improve the efficiency of the treasury operations. And that's precisely the path I and the team were on over the last couple of years before we hit COVID. And it's all sorts of things, not a full centralization. It's a very decentralized organization, just improving the interaction between the centre and the businesses, so not being reactive and firefighting, but being proactive and partnering, putting in place a new cash pool, new treasury management system, overhauling policies, et cetera, and just strengthening the team and the resilience and the capacity of the team, succession planning and all of this. And we're making good progress. And then obviously run into the COVID situation. Obviously, this is a hospitality business. We found ourselves quite significantly impacted. And since the beginning of April, about 50% of our global business has been closed. So you need a significant shift into away from profit margins and incremental improvements to a real external and internal focus on liquidity, covenants, and the things that are bread and butter to treasury professionals, but not necessarily to our board and IR colleagues who are talking to external community analysts and investors regarding things like liquidity and covenant tests and so on. So it was a very, very challenging period. Obviously, everybody, many others are in the same category, of course. We had to do a lot very quickly, and just sort of reflecting back on it in that period at the middle of March, the office had technically closed. We'd gone into lockdown. The only people left in the office were the CEO, CFO, and a few of us from the Treasury team, which probably tells you a lot about where the focus was at the time. Our initial projections of what we thought we may need, and that was based on input from the businesses, of course. We came up with a number. Our CEO said, you need to double it in terms of liquidity. So really, it's kind of sharp intake of breath. So we did a lot in a very short space of time, and just to sort of rattle them off: incremental credit facility, Bank of England, COVID corporate finance facility. We were, I think, the first corporate to access that program at 1 minute past 10 on the day that the window opened for issuance.
You're doing the speed calling like you do for concert tickets. You're like, hey, it's us.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And I think that's the key thing here. It's just sort of identifying where we were going and responding really rapidly. Every bank was being asked for additional liquidity. Some of your banking partners, in our case, more helpful than others. It was pretty challenging to put credit facilities in place at the end of March this year. So we did that with the Bank of England facility, covenant waivers, and we'd negotiated our financial covenants from our bank facility last year. Smart move, but with hindsight. We had legacy covenants in our US private placements, which since initiation in 2011 had never had any airtime, and we'd operated miles inside of those covenants. All of a sudden, the latest projections say you might have an issue. So going through the covenant waiver process as part of going concern debate for the half year end for the audit, lot of time spent with the board going through liquidity and our response, and then culminated in a 2 billion accelerated equity placing, which I think is the largest equity placing in the UK as a response to sort of COVID, and all that done in a sort of 10-week period, which was continually intense and moving from one sort of stressful project to another. But if you sort of, as soon as you can reflect back on it, I'm really proud of the team for the resilience and the ability to step up when asked. I said when we went into this, when we first started working from home, this is our time in the spotlight and we need to step up. And okay, not every single person in the team was directly involved in all of the projects, but even if people weren't, they were picking up the slack where other people were focused on some of those crises projects. So it's sort of good indication that good people in place with the right experience and frankly the right attitude to step up and to work with that immediacy and laser-like focus when it's required, and that for me is the most rewarding part of it. I think we were able to step up to the challenge and really sort of help put the company in a good place. Now we're moved on to there are plenty of challenges ahead, but at least liquidity, balance sheet, and all the things that we can control as a treasury team, we're in good shape on. So it was certainly challenging, definitely, but it was very rewarding to see the response.
And as you come out of it now, what are the sort of plans for the future? Who knows? We're slowly a return to normal, if that's the right way to put it. But as we move forward, how is the business recovering? How's Treasury sort of planning for the future sort of thing?
Yeah, well, we don't have the crystal ball on when our business comes back. We don't know when people will be back to mass sporting events. We don't know when people will be fully back into their offices eating our food, and and indeed whether there are some structural changes with more working from home going forward, sort of changing the business model a bit. So all we've been able to do is to organise our balance sheet and liquidity, etc., to say, look, we're well placed to deal with it, even if this situation pertains for many years to come. So that's the first thing that we can do. I think we have to take some learnings from all of this, and one that when push comes to shove, we can move more quickly. Sometimes big companies can be rightly accused of being a bit slow to make changes, but when you're really sort of faced with it, you can do things very rapidly, the right level of interaction across the business. So we shouldn't lose sight of that going forward. And it's a reminder that we need to be as efficient as we possibly can on the basics and free up our I think the philosophy for us is use the technology that's available, automate not the day jobs, but automate the processes as far as we can, so that we can maximize using our relatively small resource. We're not a big team, to better support the business. And that has to be something we continue focusing on going forward.
How do you filter that? And again, just to put it in perspective, I sometimes talk about CFOs not pushing the treasurer under the bus, but pushing you out in the front of being their filter for technology, being their filter for new initiatives, and saying that, and we talked about this again, that you very much are at the forefront of a lot of financing and initiatives and this fresh technology, and you go, is this right? You're constantly looking at what would be the return on investment if we did move to this system, or is it driven by the business and thinking, actually, we need to implement this to make it work? Or what's the sort of thought process, would you say?
I think it's hard, and I think it's getting increasingly hard with the way the technology is sort of developing. One, it's obviously a great enabler for some of the basics, but if you take our situation, decentralized company, lots of different ERP platforms around the place. So no uniform ERP solution. So we're the opposite end of centralization when it comes to consistency of processing and access to information. So obviously that's a business issue. It's not something we could necessarily drive from the treasury side. So we have to sort of step back and say, well, what's important to us? Where can we add some value? So we put, just as a small example, we put in place a notional cash pool over the last couple of years. And it might not be sort of seen as state of the art and full physical centralization of cash, but it reflects our organization and is a relatively quick win. obviously effort to put it in, but it's a relatively quick win to get most of the benefits without disrupting what's going on in the business. So, you have to be sort of proportional. It won't be the same for everyone. Some people listening to that will say, why would you possibly have a notional cash pool these days? But it worked for us. It got us most of the benefits with minimal disruption around the business and in a low margin business. And this hospitality is a low margin business. You have to be efficient with what you do. I think sort of picking between how the technology is developing, we are still at the point of putting in an upgraded treasury management system is our sort of core system. And hopefully we've got that decision right, and hopefully with the capabilities to build and integrate going forward with that system. That's you can't do everything all at the same time. So we've sort of broken down it to let's do the cash pool, let's do the treasury management system, and then let's see where we are and see how it evolves from there.
We're coming towards the end of the show, and what we'll do is we'll put Brendan's LinkedIn profile in the show notes. But before we get your top 3 tips, if you like, for people if they want to, follow a similar career to yourself, but just back from that, just for a moment, just with yourself, you've been through this amazing journey of treasury, and it's taken you around the world, literally. Again, what are your thoughts just on being a treasurer and why it's such a great profession? Because we talked about this, and we were just saying that it's a blessing and a curse sometimes as well. We were just talking about the fact that all treasurers do exactly the same job, the same way, with the same title, and they don't. It's all different ways and different challenges, which is in itself is fantastic. But you then came up, and we were then talking about, you were saying that it literally has been the way to take you around the world as a person. So just reflecting on that, for the listeners today, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think what first attracted me when I had that first discussion before I moved into Treasury sort of over 20 years ago now, the things that I felt attracted me at the time, it's like it's forward looking, it's externally focused, it's highly international, if you're in a large international group, of course, and it's impacted by external events, which can make it challenging, but it also makes it very relevant. What's going on in the wider world, to a lesser or greater extent, has an impact on what we do. I like the external focus, the relationships with, whether it's with banks, other stakeholders, rating agencies. It's another dimension to the role. And I think being in the corporate HQ gives you sort of excellent insight to the business. Obviously, you have good access to senior leaders and the board. There's a lot of individuals that I interact with on a day-to-day basis where you're continually learning from, whether that's sort of business knowledge, technical knowledge, or just their leadership approach. And I think it's a great place to see all of that. And good level of internal collaboration as well. One of the things, we work closely with other corporate functions and with other parts of the business as well. Each of the countries across, we're in 45 countries and have interaction with all of them from time to time. And I think also there is an ability to make a real difference. Whether that's financially, we've tweaked around with our FX and interest policies and delivered some material savings as a result. Same on the insurance side, efficiency of operations. If we can make our lives easier and the lives easier of all of our operating companies around the group, then so much the better. So I think all the principles of what happens in Treasury, what we do, the risks that we manage, somewhat similar to when I started. The way we go about it is quite different now with more technology. And as you say, this is a transferable skill to a lesser or greater extent. Every large company will need a treasury resource. And as I've sort of proven to myself and evidence of, you can do this role in pretty much any country, language barriers aside, and pretty much any sector. The nuances and the specifics will be different, but having that sort of transferable skill is, I found sort of it's helped have a really sort of rewarding and interesting career, and I can't really see that changing for treasury professionals now.
Does that give you your 3 tips or everything else? I mean, we will put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. I didn't want to interrupt because I thought it was great. But, if someone is looking at that, what would you, more on just a real individual basis? So say you're sitting there, and again, a lot of our UK listeners tend to be earlier on in their careers, more treasury manager level, wanting to one day get your role. And some of the US listeners, which is a big part of the listenership as well, they will have listened into your war stories and some of the stuff you've talked about, because that's, again, when I've spoken to them, they said that's what we want to hear about, Mike. But maybe for those listeners earlier in their careers, what sort of tips would you give, or what summaries would you say?
Yeah, I think three things. I mean, one, get involved. I think that's the key thing people should focus on doing in their current roles. I would encourage people, and I do encourage people, irrespective of their level, I think people should be able to talk with confidence about what the function does, what's important, what are the key or topical issues, and how they impact the business. Because if people aren't thinking in that way, and they're not trying to understand the business and be able to articulate it. Let's just say you were stuck in a lift with the CEO and they said, well, what's going on in Treasury? People should be knowledgeable, irrespective of who they are and where they sit in the Treasury hierarchy. That level of curiosity, if you like, I think is key. Secondly, I would encourage people to get as broad an experience as possible, whatever that means. Do different roles in the function, move around. Don't say, I don't have any experience to do that. Either get the opportunity or do some job shadowing or do some sharing, or put in place a buddy system where you cover from somebody when they're on leave or something like that, just to broaden your experience. And thirdly, it doesn't necessarily have to mean changing jobs, but in my case, that's certainly benefited me significantly. We talked a bit about the international experience. That's a bonus, but it does definitely increase your confidence, your ability to deal with different situations. And I just sort of reflect and say, I was much better prepared to deal with this coronavirus crisis than I was the financial crisis in 2008, simply because I've got a lot more experience and picked up a lot more sort of scars along the way, and just have the sort of confidence and robustness to deal with it. And over and above that, changing jobs might sound scary. It might not be the easiest. The easy thing might be to do is to stay put. But I found it hugely rewarding as well. It's a steep learning curve each time you make a move, particularly if you're going into something unfamiliar. But I think if you adopt it with the right attitude, one, it will benefit your career significantly, and two, you find it hugely rewarding. You just have to be flexible and accept the ups and the downs.
Yeah. Well, great summary there. So make sure you understand the business. So if you bump into the CEO in the lift, love that one. Don't be afraid to work across roles. So you cross-train, as it were. And as you say, don't be afraid to make the move when needed, and it'll prepare you for the future. Amazing. Great final summary there from Brendan. Mr. Boucher, thank you for your time today. Been truly just a natural flow to it, and I really enjoyed it as I do with a lot of the shows, but we've known each other for many years, but I just think it just sort of flowed. I think there were so many sections that people can just grab value from, whether it's about managing people, managing a crisis. We'll release some of these as little mini excerpts sort of thing, which people can listen out for. So it all remains. Thank you very much, sir. Been great to chat.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, sir. So I hope you enjoyed that. That was an amazing conversation with Brendan Boucher, still the Group Treasurer of Compass Group. But that was 2 years ago. Now I'm bringing Brendan back to the show today. We're picking up the story from there. And at that time, we were turning a corner, and Brendan and I were just talking off air then about some of the things that have happened since then. The new, coming back to the office, working from home. I'm not going to give too many leaders with that, except to say, welcome back, Brendan. Talk us through, maybe pick up the baton from there on for the next lap of the story. Over to you, sir.
Thanks, Mike. As we were just discussing offline, I think it's amazing to think that 2 years have passed since we last sort of formally spoke. I think clearly August 2020, the world was still in the grip of the pandemic. I think the core initial actions that the Treasury team at Compass had to focus on were kind of mostly done by August 2020, but doesn't mean the business wasn't still in a phase of recovery, which it clearly was. We still had lockdowns in different parts of the world. The pandemic was still a significant factor for the global contract catering business, and our job has been from that date up to now to continue to support business in the best way that we can. That's the most fundamental thing. To a certain extent, have been able to get back to the business as usual of what we were wanting to do in Treasury, continual improvement, We've implemented our new treasury management system that was on hold during the pandemic. We've now done a first upgrade of that. We've refreshed policies and procedures at board level and communicated those. We've completed and now recently issued a sustainable financing framework for the first time. We are starting to get back to the ability to do support in country banking RFPs. And, clearly in the last couple of years, that hasn't been possible in many markets. The markets have been still dealing with the aftermath of the pandemic operationally without any bandwidth to do the projects that we would want to do, like sort out which bank we're using in Germany, for example. So we've had to be a little bit patient and just listen and work in response to what capacity the business has had. So there's a lot going on. That's the key.
And your food and beverage services, we said that in the main show before, started, FTSE 100, recovering strongly. You're seeing that? There's been lots of press over here about cancelled flights, but everyone not being able to upskill, re-recruit people post-pandemic. For you guys, is that, you started to see everyone flooding back and eating? Because again, and that feeds into working from home. If people aren't going back into the office so much, there's less need for food and support services around that. Or are you seeing that being more flexible? How's that working for you guys?
Well, business-wise, just to put it into context, in April 2020, 50% of our global business was closed. So that was how significant the impact of the pandemic was on our business. If you look at the most recent results, our quarterly trading update to the end of June 2022, we're back above pre-pandemic levels in terms of revenue. But it's been that long. So it's been a steady increase between the lows of April 2020 through to, if you like, April 2022. But we're now back trading above 100% of pre-pandemic revenues, which is a pretty sort of astonishing recovery in a pretty short space of time. I think, to your point, if you think about the sectors in which we operate, some were clearly more impacted by the pandemic than others. We operate in business and industry, as you rightly say, people. So this is catering in offices, factories, distribution centres, etc., etc. Well, no one was working from their office for a period of time, so that part of the business didn't quite grind to a standstill because factories, etc., were still able to operate, but clearly significantly impacted. That business sector has not fully recovered. It's not quite back at 100%, but it's in the 90% and heading back. So whilst there is more working from home, clearly, and that is set to stay, I think clearly, the model has changed a little bit. What we're seeing is people are, when they are in the office, they're spending a bit more time in the office, and food is a very sort of powerful social tool. So when people are together, they like to eat together, and they're spending more time eating, and they're spending more money on eating. So to a certain extent, that's helpful to make up for the lost volumes. What we've also seen is people using, and this is our clients using, food as a tool to attract people back to their offices. A number of our clients in the city have moved to free food. We ourselves in Compass have actually moved in our head office to free food, and it isn't purely a tactic to get people back to the office, but it's helpful to encourage people back to the office. And I think it's a nice touch to enable people to spend more time collaborating and eating, drinking when they are in the office. So that's the business and industry side. But if you think about the other sectors in which we operate, sports and leisure, well, that ground to 100% to zero at the height of the pandemic, that has recovered very, very strongly. If you're a sports fan, we do a lot of stadiums in the UK, Wimbledon, for example, and the same around the globe, particularly in North America. And as people have been able to go back to their events, they've done so with a huge amount of enthusiasm, and they've had a few pounds or dollars in their pockets, and they've put it to work spending when they go and watch the baseball or the football or whatever it happens to be. So that's bounced back very strongly. In other areas, we operate in healthcare and seniors, so hospital, senior care, living, etc. That's been resilient, or more resilient, as you'd expect through the pandemic and so on. So it's been varied depending on different parts of the business, but I think the overall message is the business has recovered very strongly from a pretty challenging time when half of our global business was shut in April 2020.
I think also, I don't know if it's directly relevant. I was talking to a client candidate the other day. He said, what about you guys? And, very similar to you, he said, well, all of your business was hit. I said, yeah, it was. And it was a tough time, but also everybody's business was hit. If it was just us having a 50% cut in revenues, but also our competitors were having the same, and we certainly became match fit. That was one of the things we did. Right, we'll get this done, we'll sort this out. And it sounded like, again, you and I have spoken about this, Brenda, that you were in a similar situation. It wasn't just you. If it was just you in that situation, then that's an issue. Whereas if the entire sector, the entire world, exactly, the entire sector was down, then, as you said, you're now coming out of it and you've improved yourselves. And thinking about that, this, you touched on it there about working from home a little bit more. How are you seeing that affect you guys in Treasury per se?
Working from home is here to stay to some extent, and I personally think most people will appreciate the additional flexibility of being able to work from home, whether it's 1, 2, or even 3 days a week. A lot of people have long commutes. A lot of people will appreciate the additional flexibility. My personal view is I prefer to be in the office, having had a chunk of time over the last few years working from home than a chunk of time working back in the office. I prefer the interaction with my colleagues face to face, not just with the team, but with the wider organization. I prefer work being work and home being home to a greater extent. But the flexibility, I think, is the key. And from my perspective, having the right culture in place in your team or your organization is far more important than being stringent about saying, well, thou shalt be in the office X days a week. I mean, we as an organization, our head office said philosophically, we should be together more than we're apart. And so take that as aim for 3 days a week in the office, but it's clearly it's not policed. It's not rigid. Most people, I think, have been happy with that. Most people want to come to the office. We all enjoy the interaction. We try to create a good work environment. I think most people appreciate you could learn more, you can pick things up. It's easier to keep the communication going when you see people at least a couple times a week. And I think that's the key to it. If you weren't seeing your colleagues or your teammates or your wider business colleagues from week to week, then I think you get out of touch quite quickly. But even if you're just sort of touching in once or twice a week, then I think that's probably a pretty good place to be. I'd be hesitant to say anyone would, or many people would be demanding 5 days a week in the office going forward.
Well, again, and I think, you qualified that very well, actually. I was going to re-qualify, but didn't need to, because as you say, and this is one of the, both Brendan and I touched on this, there's an ex-client of ours, and please say, they were saying, you've got 5 positions open. 3 of them, I think, 5 of them, 2 of them in London, 2 of them in New York, and 1 in Singapore. I was like, right, 5 days a week in the office, must be in the office. And, that must be, not for any business reason, but maybe for an ultra control thing or whatever. It doesn't matter. I don't want to work with them. If they would have caught us in that, and we've already said this we recently had another client who said, we're a bit more paper-based, we're a bit more traditional like that. Right. And it must be 5 days a week in the office. And it was much more sort of not entrusting people and everything else. This was a more junior role that Craig was going to work on, a treasury manager, and this must be like this. And he just simply said, well, my thoughts are this, Mike. I went, I agree. We're out. Because we just said, do you know what? That's not the kind of clients we need or want to work with. Not least, Sally, we're going to struggle to fill the job and we're going to let them down. But more, we don't do that as a business. We have Carly, who now works 100% remotely because she prefers that. She doesn't live that far from the office. That's her working style. We see her quite regularly whenever she wants to, but that's what she prefers. I'm not going to regulate it. I don't need to. There's no need. There's that flip side of when we do need to see it, we do need to, but we don't all the time. And you're the same though, aren't you?
I think that's right. I mean, pre-pandemic, not many people would have said, look, let's test our disaster recovery or business continuity plan by working from home throughout a year end or a month end or whatever
the key pinch points are. But we did that. We proved it's possible, which is a good place to be. So I think you want people who want to work as a team. I think that's really important in Treasury. It doesn't mean everyone has to be in the office face to face. I mean, just two examples from my recent past. We had a global leadership conference face to face in London about a month ago with 350 odd people from around the group. That proved the power of personal communication. Having not been able to do those events for a while, that was sort of incredible. Clearly, is a benefit of getting people together. But on the other hand, we just completed a virtual investor roadshow. People in different locations. Is a very efficient way of doing that type of activity. People not having to travel transatlantic and spend 2 or 3 days traveling around different locations to get to different meetings. You can just do them back to back to back in an afternoon. So I think sort of two recent anecdotes from my side, which show both can work if you use them appropriately at the right time.
Yeah, exactly. As I say, fit for purpose, appropriate at the right time. Great way to describe it. Well, anyone that's listened today, they've already listened to the first show. We're into this sort of follow-up, so I'm not going to take too much more of your time. Looking to the future now, we've been through this. We talked about it, you and I, then it's not been a recession per se. This has been a predictable pandemic. It's been tragic and everything else. But now as businesses recover in this new, fitter format sort of thing going forward, where do you see it? What are the things that you think, there are conferences coming up, exactly as you say, or, what are you getting the guys in the team to focus on, or you as a treasurer, what are the things that you're thinking about going forward?
Well, I think, there's always a lot going on in our business. We've remained decentralized. We've been through all of the pandemic downside, then up the other side. We're growing very strongly. So, there's always a lot going on. Fundamentally, I always sort of describe ourselves. We are a support function. So, our fundamental job is to continue to support all the changes that are going on around the business, whatever they may be. And our priorities sort of change on a weekly or monthly basis, and they need to. We need to be that nimble. So we need to continue to focus on. I think Treasury has always been an area of continual improvement, and we're no different to that. So continuing to develop how we use technology. We as I said before, we put a new treasury management system in place that went live once we were back in the office post pandemic. We've now done a first upgrade of that. So. But it doesn't mean you can just sort of leave it on the shelf, right? We've got lots of things that were either deprioritized or just weren't possible to do with the first implementation. But we need we've spent a lot of time, money, and effort on putting it in place. So we need to continually enhance that. We've got a global notional cash pool in place. We didn't get chance pre-pandemic to turn on all of the automatic sweeps, so we need to go back and do that. One thing that we kind of recognized as a bit of deficiency across our corporate center during the pandemic is our capability in terms of business modeling. The basic consolidations in place, yes, but above that, a lot of use of complex spreadsheets, a little bit individual point person risk, and not particularly joined up. So again, another opportunity for us to use more modern technology to improve the resilience and automation and speed of which we can collaborate. I think that aside, we need to continue to develop the team. I'm fortunate we've got a sort of strong and stable team in place, but we need to make sure that we are bringing our treasury managers through, that they're getting enough exposure, they're getting involved, they're getting good opportunities, getting good experience, because as you know in your business, Mike, if people don't get that internally, they will go elsewhere. And this is not specific to Treasury, but Compass is a business. We recruit a lot of chefs, obviously, and people into our operations. And we always say Compass should be a career for life. There should be opportunities for mobility, to progress. We have a number of people who joined our organization as chefs who are now running managing directors, regions, or countries. So, there's should be endless opportunity, and really the same should apply in the treasury space. So I think we need to never lose sort of sight of that. We need to keep giving opportunities. There's always a lot going on in the business. So there's no reason why in our relatively small team, everyone shouldn't get good exposure to everything. So we need to continue to sort of focus on that.
Yeah,
I think we've got a bit more of a role to play in the whole sort of sustainability agenda. We set up a sustainable finance working group, which we thus far have chaired from Treasury. There's a huge amount more we still need to do in that space, whether it's sort of reporting, getting the right disciplines in place, and just continuing to drive the sustainability agenda. It's we clearly have a sustainability team, but I think as many people will recognize, the work around this is coming into sort of mainstream finance, and I think Treasury has a role to play there, particularly if you're linking financing to sustainability going down the track. So there's one of the things that I've always found interesting about Treasury is always evolving, it's always changing. We're never bored. There's always a lot to do, and I see the same going forward, frankly.
And again, final great words there from you, Brendan. But what I'm going to do is, again, give you the final say. So final takeaway, if you like, for anyone that's listening today. They've heard first show, heard second show, they called up with you. What do you think about what's the final words to those Treasury professionals out there?
Well, I think just to sort of reflect, one of the things that attracted me to Treasury in the first place, and I've been doing it for quite a number of years now, was the fact that it's forward-looking, it's external. What's going on in the outside world has a real impact on what we're doing in the function, in the company, day to day. And if you just look at what's happened over the last few years, clearly the pandemic, in our case at least, had a massive impact on the business and a massive impact on Treasury and what we're able to do. So, the ability to work through that really provide a high degree of sort of value and resilience to the company with our doing the Treasury basics extraordinarily well during that period is something I look back, when I finally retire, with pride on how we went through it. But even now, rampant global inflation has a clear impact on our business, on financial markets. You've seen it with sort of going from, virtually zero interest rates in the main currencies. That's changed significantly, and we've had to functionally adapt and work with that, tested the sort of resilience of our policies in a rapidly changing world. So, all of the things I found interesting when I first thought about moving into Treasury, I still find interesting now. And I think, to sum up, that's what makes it a really rewarding career, because it's very dynamic, it's ever changing, and there is a real opportunity to make a difference. So, and anyone listening, I think Treasury is an amazing place to spend your career.
Hello, it's Mike here again. I hope you enjoyed this week's show. If you did, then maybe you want to follow the show or subscribe, depending on where you listen, whether that's iTunes, Spotify, or another great place to listen to the show from. It's totally free and means that you'll be the first to see each and every week when we release a new show. And maybe whilst you're there, you could even leave a quick review. Reviews and ratings are among the most important metrics for a podcast to effectively rank. And as you can probably appreciate, the podcast is a lot of hard work to produce every week. It'd be amazing. Just take, say, 20 seconds, leave a quick review of my amazing guests and their great career stories. We'd really appreciate it. Thanks very much, and I can't wait to see you soon.